Alright, we're back again with Invincible's 5th episode of its 3rd season, in a story that really checks in on and expands its side characters and stories. We get a remarkable deep dive into Dupli-Kate and Multi-Paul's history, a massive development in the Titan/Machinehead story, maybe the most important Mark and Eve story so far, and a lot more. While I've seen some people complain that this feels like filler, I'd like to belligerently disagree. The world building is one of the show's greatest strengths, and so many of these side stories are vitally important to reinforcing the overall themes of the season. This week's episode was exactly what I thought this season needed to help pace out the narrative and settle our characters before stuff gets real. Spoilers for the episode, this was supposed to be easy ahead, and I just want to once again kindly ask y'all, please do not spoil the comics for anybody in the comments. Thank you. So this episode features a handful of interconnected stories spanning across a bunch of characters. We've got a huge focus on Titan, his family, and his conflict with Master Liu and the Order now that he's running the city. This intertwines with the craziest Multi-Paul story we've gotten, which also adds a ton of detail and nuance to his and Kate's history, and of course Mark and Eve learning to monetize their abilities to make ends meet now that they're working on their own without Cecil. It's all really great, important progression and truly features some of the most insane sequences in the entire series, which is why we should start with Multi-Paul. The prison break sequence truly broke my brain. Absolutely unhinged concept, and I'm not even sure how much of it I can show because it is violent. Paul basically wedges one of himself safely in the ceiling area and then multiplies until his dying duplicates crush each other and fill the space so tightly that the door flies off the hinge. Literal sicko mode. One of the grossest things I've ever seen in this show, and honestly, kind of cool. So cool that it had me rooting for this escape attempt just on a narrative level. And this escape attempt leads to what is for sure one of the highlights of the episode for me, a deep dive into Kate and Paul's lives leading up to their diverting paths as hero and villain. The flashback to their childhood, revealing that their father basically went catatonic, having to try and take care of the countless duplicates of both children, was very sad, and showcases something that we've seen explored through Rex and Ray's dialogue a bit in this season too, how kids with powers are almost certainly going to be used by somebody to further their own goals and motives. Ray's parents used her, Rex was sold to the state, and similarly, Kate and Paul were trained by some kind of government agency to be used as assets, starting when they were children. I hope this show is willing to explore these concepts even further because I think it's the type of exploitation that has a lot of potential to be unpacked really thoroughly within this universe. And I think this little flashback does a cool job showing the results it can yield, and maybe more interestingly, how those diverting paths that Kate and Paul took can be pretty damn parallel. Paul ends up abandoning the training and going on the run, eventually falling into the life of crime, being used as an assassin by the Order, while Kate continues through the program and then is utilized on Teen Team and the Guardians by the GDA. But ultimately, I think what this little vignette is trying to break down is that for people with powers like this, these paths aren't all that different, at least on a personal level. Both Kate and Paul are being used by organizations to further their own goals. Neither of them have much of a say in terms of who or what they get to do or be in the world. They're superpowered, indentured servants for bigger, more powerful people. And I think most fittingly, the first thing we hear Kate say to Paul really illustrates this.
I was this close to convincing Cecil to put you on a team to make up for all the shit you've done.
Paul's ticket out of trouble is basically just to become a pawn for a different group, a different master. And he rightfully doesn't really see this as any different than what he was doing before. And as this season has shown time and time again, people with these kinds of abilities are not often left in isolation.
Just like your GDA. They don't abandon tools they're not done with yet.
I think what makes this story so tragic is that you can't blame Paul for leaving as a kid, for escaping what was basically a forced superpowered boot camp so he could become a tool and a pawn. There's obviously no defending the actions he's taken as an adult and the things he's done for the Order, but there is a sincere tragedy in the fact that he was a kid who was taken advantage of. He felt trapped, and his escape into a more welcoming environment led him into a horrendous life of crime and murder. And I also think it's an interesting show of character for Kate that, despite what Paul has done, she was willing to try and get him out of prison to be part of one of Cecil's teams, once again tying into the themes of characters' malleable morality this season. But the attempted Paul breakouts also tie into the Titan story in this episode, which is a welcome check-in for me. Titan took over Machinehead's organized crime ring in the city, but now he's reconciling with the fact that his crime ring is also supposed to answer to a bigger organization, the Order, which of course happens to be run by a man who can turn into a dragon. I love this universe. But Master Liu Liu, aka the Dragon Man, is basically testing Titan's loyalty, seeing if he'll break Paul out of prison for him and threatening his family in the process. And I think this is a super interesting conundrum for Titan. He manipulated Mark and usurped Machinehead all so that he wouldn't have to answer to anybody anymore. He became the top dog, only to realize that there isn't really such thing. Even seemingly at the top, he has someone above him to answer to still. And rather than bend knee to the order, he once again manages to game the system, but we'll get there. It's another example of how well this show navigates the complexities of this superpowered world, intermingled with aspects of real life. This season as a whole is showing how difficult it can be for anyone in this world to exist outside of some sort of system. Whether that's the Guardians, who quit earlier in the season, Mark refusing to work with the GDA, or Titan desperately trying to remain beholden to no masters. Speaking of Mark refusing to work with the GDA, the Mark x Eve subplot is probably the most important so far in terms of their relationship, and honestly it's the thing that I felt this season was really missing the mark on until now, pun intended. It's kinda easy to forget that Mark and Eve are still pretty young, and the whole navigating an adult relationship while living at home thing plays a big role here, down to Eve sneaking out of Mark's room and pretending to be in the neighborhood for breakfast.
They made too much noise playing and woke me up.
And the difficulties of this lead to Mark and Eve once again making some very big, very fast decisions within their relationship, like trying to get their own apartment.
If we had a place of our own, we could just be together.
Honestly, I do find this scene very cute and they're very charming together. I love them as a couple. It just still all feels way too fast. I've been saying this all season. This is no different for me. But the other major development here is Invincible Inc., Eve's business plan so that the pair can actually make a living outside of the existing superhero systems. A really fun idea, basically putting Mark and Eve on retainer at Peyton Penitentiary in case of superpowered breakouts or break-ins, which obviously fits giving the Multi-Paul breakout subplot this episode. Really, all of this episode's various subplots fit together really neatly. I also love seeing Eve take charge on the business side of things. She's gone on such a journey over the course of the show and has shown the most interest in finding ways outside of straight up superheroism to use her powers. I like that she's got her focus in different areas and learning to navigate the world outside of some of these existing organizations. Mark and Eve's desires to move into their own place also exacerbates Oliver's acting out a tiny bit, but I really loved this little Oliver focused sequence. After he runs away from home, Mark and Eve discover that he's actually made friends, like real normal friends. And I have to say, I was wildly relieved when they fully baited us into thinking he was gonna pummel these bullies, only for him to simply pants them. I think this is not only a great piece of development for Oliver, but for Mark as well. It really highlights how much watching over Oliver is weighing on Mark's shoulders and how difficult it's been for him to sit idly by and hope/trust that Oliver will learn to do the right thing. It's sort of a crash course in parenting as basically the surrogate father figure in Oliver's life.
He's a good kid, Mark.
This is further exacerbated by the fact that Debbie is really counting on Mark to help, since having a purple superpowered alien child isn't exactly precedented. Debbie really struggles with the idea of how she might be able to handle parenting Oliver on her own.
I can't follow him like you can, Mark.
This also adds to that ever-building pressure that Mark is feeling. There is just an overwhelming number of things coming at him from all angles. The impending Viltrumite invasion, being at odds with Cecil, the mysterious drones spying on him and his family, general superheroing duties and making ends meet, and then balancing that with his love life and family life. Of course, he's incredibly worried about his brother and mom, who were nearly killed the previous season. It's easy to understand why he's starting to crack a little bit, why he's becoming a little more hardened and angsty in this era. This episode goes a long way to highlight that sort of Peter Parker problem, the work-life balance issue. Mark and Eve spend the entire episode figuring out how they can start their life together and do what's best for them, and by the end, they realize that they don't really have that luxury yet. And we'll get back to that. All of these stories culminate in a big, messy, organized crime dragon attack. Does that track at all? I actually really love how this all plays out. Titan basically 4D chesses himself to freedom by working with Machinehead again and playing Liu and the Order. He allows Liu to believe he was in control, assaulting Peyton Penitentiary to break Paul out, but during the chaos, Isotope breaks Machinehead out of the very same prison. But before we get into those results, let's talk about the dragon fight. Another reason I'm kinda shocked by anyone who says this episode was boring filler, this shit is fun, and seeing Mark and Eve team up in such an effective and satisfying way is a really great reflection of how in sync they are in terms of their relationship. They've just been really successful in terms of being there for and supporting one another, and that's showcased in both their personal lives and in the way they fight. Not to mention Eve's sick pink energy armor. Though once again, Mark really does kind of get his ass kicked here, even though he does manage to kill Liu one time, dude just regenerates, and Mark is basically fully impaled. I don't know how he made it out of this one. But what makes these intertwining stories work for me is the Machinehead reveal. Once he breaks out of prison, he full-on murders Liu when he's in his dragon trance, stopping the assault on the prison and leaving a very vacant position at the top of the order. And because this was all facilitated by Titan, he gets what he wants as well. Even though he previously was responsible for usurping Machinehead, by helping him take this even higher position of authority, Titan gets exactly what he wants. He gets to keep his position, and he gets out of the order. With one caveat though.
Backstab me again, and I'm gonna drown you in your kid's blood.
Though I do have to say, the post-credit scene being another character who has just died, immediately being resurrected, did kind of annoy the hell out of me. But yeah, Liu will be back for blood. Again, I really think this episode is just well written. It's a lot of seemingly disparate stories seamlessly woven together into a really cool fight and showdown with a lot of fun twists. But on a character level, they do one thing that went a really long way for me. Remember how I have not shut up about how, despite their chemistry, Mark and Eve have been moving way too quickly as a couple?
I have been feeling like things were moving kind of fast.
Thank you, Eve. Eve and Mark both decide that moving in together isn't really feasible with everything that's going on, and they acknowledge that they will probably benefit from not rushing too quickly into anything right now. I really love Eve and Mark together, so this was something I really needed. A proper in-universe acknowledgement of what I felt was more of a pacing issue in an episode that, in my opinion, really helps even out that pacing. This episode was so vitally important for its characters and maneuvering various pieces within the world building, and though I know some people felt like it was quote-unquote filler, obviously these events are going to play roles later in the show. Liu's betrayal and resurrection, Multi-Paul's breakout, Machinehead's claiming of the order, Titan's precarious position as a mob boss while trying to protect his family, so many new pieces on the board, and now, after a couple of slower, more paced out episodes, the season is likely going to barrel full speed ahead towards what will undoubtedly be an explosive final stretch of the season. I've actually seen up through episode 6 already, and let me tell you, next week's episode, whew, I cannot wait to talk about that thing. But what do y'all think about this week's Invincible? Do you appreciate the world building and vital character development as much as I do, or do you just want to see the big boys punch each other? Let me know below in the comments. Stay tuned, because next week, it's a wild one. Peace.
I stay mellow watching Johnny two cellos. He talks cartoons, he's a really cool fellow. He keeps you posted on adult cartoons. If that's what you're into, then grab a spoon and a very big bowl of your favorite cereal. Feels like Saturday morning cartoon material. Johnny two cellos, watch him on YouTube. Now enjoy this groove and bust a move.